They didn't just try to stop a movie, they tried to erase it completely. One actor was warned he'd never work again, studios were threatened, and an entire industry went silent. But what happened next shocked Hollywood, and even Joe Rogan couldn't ignore it. They told him it would end his career. They warned that the actor would be blacklisted forever. Every major studio in Hollywood received the same message: stay away from this film, or you will be finished too. From Fox to the most powerful players in the industry, the pressure was relentless. The warning was not subtle: touch this project and you are done. Your future disappears. Your place in Hollywood vanishes overnight. No one stepped in. No one offered protection. No one stood beside him when it mattered. So Mel Gibson did something Hollywood never expected. He moved forward anyway. He financed the film himself, fully aware that he could lose everything. He later described the experience as strange, almost surreal, putting up his own money while quietly telling himself that, at best, he might just break even. But this was never simply about profit. It was a gamble on a story that powerful people seemed determined to bury. And when it was all over, Hollywood was left facing a problem it still cannot fully explain. Because what happened next was never supposed to happen. The film they tried to isolate found a way around the system. It bypassed the gatekeepers. It ignored the traditional path. It slipped past the very people who decide which stories are allowed to live and which ones are quietly buried before they ever reach an audience. And when it worked, the reaction inside the industry was shock. Real shock. Did anyone just see that? Did anyone just see this man walk around the entire machine and win? Because if one person could do it, others might try. And that is what made this story bigger than just a movie. Here is what most people still fail to connect. The resistance was never only about religion. The blacklisting was never simply about controversy. What Gibson described was something darker, something structured, something deliberate. A coordinated, industry-wide effort to make sure the public never saw this film. And when Joe Rogan finally began to understand what really happened behind the Passion of the Christ, even he struggled to contain his reaction. Please Thorasa Expen Crow. They told him it would end his career. They warned that the actor would be blacklisted forever. Every major studio in Hollywood received the same message: stay away from this film, or you will be finished too. From Fox to the most powerful players in the industry, the pressure was relentless, quiet, calculated, and impossible to ignore. The warning was not subtle: touch this project and you are done. Your future disappears. Your name fades from every casting list. Your place in Hollywood vanishes overnight. No one stepped in. No one offered protection. No one stood beside him when it mattered most. The silence from the industry was just as loud as the threats themselves. So Mel Gibson did something Hollywood never expected. He moved forward anyway. He financed the film himself, fully aware that he could lose everything: his money, his reputation, even his standing in the industry he had spent decades building. He later described the experience as strange, almost surreal. He was risking his own fortune while quietly telling himself that, at best, he might just break even. But deep down, this was never about profit. It was about something far more personal. This was a gamble on a story that powerful people seemed determined to bury, a story they did not want reaching the public. And when it was all over, Hollywood was left facing a problem it still cannot fully explain. Because what happened next was never supposed to happen. The film they tried to isolate found a way around the system. It bypassed the gatekeepers. It ignored the traditional path that every filmmaker is expected to follow. It slipped past the very people who decide which stories are allowed to exist and which ones quietly disappear before anyone ever hears about them. And when it worked, the reaction inside the industry was not just surprise. It was disbelief. Did anyone just see that? Did anyone just see this man walk around the entire machine and win? Because if one person could do it, others might try. And that possibility was far more dangerous than the film itself. That is what made this story bigger than just a movie. It was no longer about one project. It was about control, about who gets to decide which stories are told and which ones are silenced. And here is the part most people still fail to connect. The resistance was never only about religion. The blacklisting was never simply about controversy. What Gibson described was something deeper, something more organized, a coordinated, industry-wide effort to make sure the public never saw this film. And when Joe Rogan finally began to understand the full picture of what really happened behind the Passion of the Christ, even he, someone known for staying calm, skeptical, and unshaken, struggled to contain his reaction. Because in that moment, it stopped sounding like a Hollywood story and started sounding like something much bigger. Joe Rogan is not easily shaken. He has sat across from presidents, war veterans, scientists, billionaires, elite fighters, people who have stared directly into the darkest corners of human experience. He is known for his composure. He leans in, not back. He pushes, he challenges, he questions everything. Calm isn't something he performs, it's something he lives in. But when Mel Gibson sat across from him and began pulling back the curtain on what really happened during the making and release of the Passion of the Christ, something shifted. The atmosphere changed. The room felt heavier, like the conversation had crossed a line from discussion into something deeper, something uncomfortable, something real. This wasn't a promotional appearance. Gibson wasn't there to sell a movie, rebuild his reputation, or control a narrative. He wasn't polishing anything. He was unloading something he had carried quietly for over 20 years. And Rogan, who is known for interrupting, for probing, for testing every claim from every angle, did something rare. He stopped pushing. He listened. Because what Gibson was describing didn't sound like Hollywood gossip. It didn't feel like recycled drama or exaggerated controversy. It felt darker than that. It felt deliberate. It sounded like an entire industry had quietly aligned behind a single goal, that a story about Jesus Christ should never reach the public. Not through loud bans or official statements, but through silence, through meetings that never happened, through calls that were never returned, through support that simply vanished, through quiet warnings passed from one powerful figure to another, a kind of invisible wall, one you don't see until you try to walk through it. And for a while, it almost worked. To understand why Rogan reacted the way he did, you have to go back further. Not to the beginning of the film, but to the beginning of the resistance. When Gibson first began developing the Passion of the Christ, he wasn't an outsider trying to force his way in. He was already inside, deep inside. He was one of the most respected figures in the industry. He had credibility. He had a track record that few could match. He had Academy Awards. He had made Braveheart, a film that had earned both critical acclaim and cultural impact. Under normal circumstances, someone like him didn't ask for permission. He was given it. But this time, none of it mattered. The moment Gibson made it clear that this film would not soften the suffering, would not sanitize the crucifixion, would not turn one of history's most brutal events into something comfortable or easy to watch, everything began to change. Not loudly, not publicly, quietly. Calls that used to be returned within minutes started going unanswered. Meetings that once would have been locked in immediately were delayed, postponed, and eventually forgotten. People who had stood beside him for years, people he had worked with, trusted, built relationships with, suddenly became distant, harder to reach, harder to read. No one needed to say it directly. The message was already clear. This story is not welcome here. And beneath all of it was a double standard Gibson couldn't ignore. Other religions could be explored with nuance, with respect, with artistic depth. Stories rooted in other belief systems were approached carefully, even reverently. But the moment someone tried to tell the story of Jesus Christ with sincerity and conviction, the tone shifted. Suddenly, people became uncomfortable. Suddenly, there were objections. Suddenly, Hollywood had concerns. And according to Gibson, those concerns didn't just come from mid-level executives or cautious producers. They reached the very top. He recalled that Rupert Murdoch had shown interest in distributing the film, but after speaking with advisors, after hearing what others had to say, he stepped back. The warning he received was blunt. If he moved forward with this film, it could cost him everything. Within a few years, his business could collapse. Think about that. A man like Rupert Murdoch, one of the most powerful media figures on the planet, someone who built an empire on risk, controversy, and influence, was warned away from a single film. That is not routine caution. That is not standard financial analysis. That feels like pressure. That feels like a line being drawn. And it worked. He walked away. Rupert Murdoch stepped back, and once he did, the rest of Hollywood followed. One by one, the major studios pulled away. Quietly, carefully. No headlines, no public statements, just distance. The kind of distance that tells you everything without saying a word. While Mel Gibson was facing pressure behind the camera, another man was about to pay a completely different price in front of it. Jim Caviezel was, at that time, one of the most promising actors in Hollywood. He had presence, he had intensity, and more importantly, he had something the camera cannot fake, a kind of stillness, a depth that pulls you in without effort. Gibson first noticed him in the thin red line in a single close-up that stopped him cold. There was something in Caviezel's face, something almost childlike, almost otherworldly, that made Gibson immediately ask, "Who is that?" He offered him the role. But before Caviezel could fully grasp what saying yes would mean, Gibson's team sat him down and gave him the truth. Not the motivational version, not the polished version. The real version. These are the stakes. And those stakes were so serious that Caviezel's own team split apart over the decision. The very people responsible for protecting his career couldn't agree. Some warned him it would destroy everything he had built. Others believed it was something he had to do, no matter the cost. And in the middle of that conflict, Caviezel had to step away, sit down with his wife, and make a decision that would define his life. Career or conviction? He chose the story. And the consequences were immediate. The moment he said yes, the phone stopped ringing. Not gradually, not over weeks or months. Instantly, Hollywood went silent. And Caviezel understood exactly what that silence meant. An entire industry, one that depended on millions of Christian viewers buying tickets, had quietly decided that the most important story to those same people was too dangerous to touch. That contradiction wasn't just professional, it was personal. It raised a deeper question. How could an industry built on serving the audience decide that one of the audience's most meaningful stories should never be told? Even after the funding disappeared, even after the studios walked away, even after Hollywood made its position painfully clear, production began. And what followed is the part many people avoid talking about. Because what happened on that set in Italy was not normal. Caviezel didn't approach the role like a typical acting job. He didn't just memorize lines or study the character from the outside. According to Gibson, he emptied himself completely. He stopped trying to act and instead surrendered to the role in a way that went far beyond technique. Gibson, who had worked with some of the best actors in the world, said he had never seen anything like it. Others had played Jesus before, but something always felt slightly artificial, slightly controlled. With Caviezel, it didn't. There was something there Gibson couldn't fully explain. And then came the physical cost. The cross he carried weighed over 150 pounds. During one take, his shoulder was dislocated. In the scourging scenes, he was struck with real whips, not harmless props, and hit hard enough to cause actual injury. One blow knocked the air out of him completely. His hands bled. His body broke down. What audiences saw on screen wasn't just performance. It was real pain. And then came something even harder to explain. The lightning. Caviezel described a moment during filming when the wind was blowing around him, until suddenly it was. The sound vanished. The air shifted. He felt something like a suction, like the atmosphere itself had changed. And then, in an instant, the strike came. The shock overwhelmed him. Years later, he said something even more startling, that after the injuries connected to the production, he died on an operating table. And when he spoke about what he experienced, it wasn't fear he described. It was peace, love, something beyond this world. Those are not casual words. And when they were spoken in that conversation, Joe Rogan did something he rarely does. He went quiet. Because Rogan doesn't go silent unless something real has entered the room. And the lightning didn't stop with Caviezel. Assistant director Jan Michelini was struck twice during production. The first time on a hill during a storm, surrounded by crosses and chaos as the crew scrambled for safety. The second time was so surreal that Gibson later described finding him sitting in a tiny car, knees pulled in, waiting, almost expecting a third strike. The odds alone were unbelievable. But what mattered more was Michelini's reaction. He didn't sue, he didn't quit, he didn't go public. He said one thing: I have to change my life. And he did. By the time production ended, the film had already survived everything that should have stopped it. The pressure, the silence, the closed doors, the quiet resistance from an entire industry. Gibson had done the impossible. He finished the film. But that created a new problem. No one would distribute it. Not a single major studio. The same companies that had no issue backing violence, controversy, and morally gray stories suddenly had standards. Suddenly they were cautious. Suddenly. Why they were concerned about public reaction. And the answer Gibson kept hearing was the same. No. At that point he believed he had lost. The industry was gone. The connections were gone. The support system was gone. He had already accepted that the money might be gone too. He made peace with the idea that this film, the one he risked everything for, might never be seen. Then something unexpected happened. A small company stepped forward. Newmarket Films. Not a giant, not a powerhouse, just a small, almost invisible company compared to the studios that had walked away. And yet, that small company became the thin line between the film and complete burial. But Gibson didn't stop there. He went directly to theater owners. He made handshake deals. He bypassed the entire distribution system Hollywood had spent decades building. He didn't ask for permission. He went around it. And that is what truly frightened people. Because systems can survive rebellion within the system. What they cannot tolerate is someone proving the system is not necessary. And then came the numbers. The film no one would touch. The film powerful figures warned against. The film that seemed too dangerous to exist. That film made around $612 million worldwide on a $30 million budget. It became the highest-grossing R-rated film in American history for 2 decades. It became the highest-grossing independent film ever made. It became one of the most successful non-English language films ever released. And Hollywood had no choice but to watch. But strangely, that wasn't what hit Rogan the hardest. It wasn't the money. It wasn't the blacklisting. It wasn't even the lightning. It was something much simpler. Gibson brought up the apostles. The men who walked beside Jesus Christ, the men who saw him die, and then went into the world claiming he had risen. Men who were hunted, tortured, exiled, and killed for that claim. Men who had nothing to gain. No wealth, no power, no safety, only suffering. And yet they didn't back down. They didn't say, "We made it up." That's what cut through everything. Not a debate, not a theory. A simple question. What kind of people die for something they know is a lie? That question didn't need theatrics. It didn't need framing. It just sat there, heavy, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. And Rogan felt it. Because beneath all the arguments, all the skepticism, all the years of questioning everything, there is something deeply difficult to dismiss about that kind of conviction. And for a moment, the conversation stopped being about religion. It became about truth, about sacrifice, about what it really means to stand for something when it costs you everything. Because in the end, they tried to bury the story, but it didn't just survive. It became one of the biggest films in history. And the real question is if they tried this hard to stop it. What were they so afraid of?